At exactly 6:14 hours on April 4th, 2026, the Persian Gulf's gray pre-dawn stillness was torn apart by a crisis that would shake the Pentagon to its foundations. The USS Carl Vincennes Combat Information Center erupted in red as their Link 16 tactical network screamed a single, devastating alert. A U.S. Navy F/A-18 Super Hornet conducting a strike package against Iranian missile production facilities near Bandar Abbas had gone silent. No emergency beacon, no mayday. Just silence, the most terrifying sound in naval aviation. The pilot had been executing a SEAD mission, suppression of enemy air defenses, at low altitude to avoid Iran's S-300 PMU-2 radar envelope. What the mission planners hadn't fully accounted for was what the Iranians had placed in the gaps: a network of mobile Tor-M2 short-range surface-to-air missile systems, repositioned overnight by IRGC engineers who had studied 37 days of American strike patterns with the cold patience of surgeons. At 6:11, as the Super Hornet descended through 3,000 feet on its attack run, two Tor-M2 9M 338K missiles tracked its heat signature and detonated within 30 meters of the aircraft. The cockpit was shredded. The pilot ejected, but at that altitude and speed, the survival odds were razor thin. His status? Unknown. But that was only the opening move. At 0947 hours, less than 4 hours later, a second alarm lit up CENTCOM's forward headquarters in Qatar. An A-10 Thunderbolt II from the 23rd Wing, nicknamed the Warthog, was conducting close air support for Special Operations Forces near the Iran-Iraq border when it was struck by a man-portable air defense system, a MANPADS, most likely an Iranian-supplied MISAG-3, fired from the ground by an IRGC Quds Force unit embedded among popular mobilization forces in Iraqi territory. The A-10's legendary titanium bathtub, the armored cockpit that has saved pilots for decades, absorbed the primary fragmentation, but the aircraft's hydraulic system was catastrophically damaged. The pilot made the call to eject over hostile terrain. She was recovered by a CSAR, Combat Search and Rescue, team within 23 minutes. But the optics were catastrophic, 2 American aircraft down in a single operational day. Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the strongman who has emerged from the shadow of the late supreme leader Ali Khamenei, didn't wait for the smoke to clear. His post went viral within minutes. The psychological warfare dimension of this conflict had just entered a new, dangerous phase. What you are about to understand is that neither of these shoot-downs was accidental. They were the products of a 37-day intelligence collection campaign by Iran's SIGINT, Signals Intelligence, apparatus, specifically the IRGC's Electronic Warfare Command, which had been quietly mapping the timing, ingress routes, and altitude profiles of every American strike sortie since February 28th. Iran's strategy wasn't to win a direct engagement with the world's most powerful air force. It was to bleed it, to make it hesitate, to force a political cost that bombs cannot answer. This was Iran's doctrine of Mosabere, strategic patience weaponized. Let's walk back to the wider battlefield picture, because these 2 aircraft were the visible tip of an iceberg of coordinated multi-domain aggression building for a week. At 0317 hours on March 28, 2026, the Houthis, Iran's most loyal proxy and the so-called Axis of Resistance, launched 2 ballistic missiles from Yemen toward Israeli territory. Israel's Arrow 3 interceptors engaged both. But the Houthis were not trying to kill Israelis. They were testing the seams of the integrated Israeli-American air defense network, probing response times, radar handoff protocols, and the electromagnetic signatures of the intercept systems. Every intercept gave Iranian analysts data. Every Arrow 3 launch revealed something. At 0455 hours on March 30th, an Iranian coordinated drone struck Britain's Akrotiri military base on Cyprus, one of the most significant attacks on a NATO installation since the alliance's founding. The drone, assessed to be a Shahed 136 derivative with a modified flight profile designed to exploit the base's radar blind spots from the south, detonated near a fuel storage facility. The British Ministry of Defense confirmed the attack and scrambled Typhoons, but the drone had already completed its mission. Iran denied involvement. No one believed them. Simultaneously, and this is the detail most analysts missed, Iranian-supplied ballistic missiles were tracked crossing Turkish and Azerbaijani airspace, with Ankara and Baku's air defense systems placed on full alert. The effect, whether intentional or not, was to sow confusion and diplomatic friction within NATO's eastern flank at precisely the moment the alliance was being asked by Washington to coordinate a response to Iranian aggression. And then came the economic blade. The Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, through which 20% of the world's oil transits every single day, had been Iran's ultimate leverage card since the conflict began. Tehran had not yet formally closed it, but it had come close. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy fast attack craft and mine-laying vessels had conducted a series of provocative exercises in the Strait's shipping lanes throughout March, forcing commercial tankers to either wait in the Gulf of Oman or divert around the Arabian Peninsula, and added 7 to 10 days of voyage time, enough to send oil futures past $140 per barrel. American gas prices crossed $4 a gallon for the first time since 2022. That number was moving faster than CENTCOM's battle plans. At 11:22 hours on April 3rd, the day before the two shootdowns, 3 IRGCN fast patrol boats conducting what they described as a navigational exercise came within 600 meters of the USS Laboon, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer transiting the strait as part of convoy escort duties. The Laboon's crew went to battle stations. The Iranian vessels broadcast on open maritime channels that the destroyer was in restricted waters, a legally absurd claim but strategically deliberate. Every such encounter was a data point. Reaction times, communication protocols, the arc of the 5-inch Mark 45 gun as it trained on the approaching boats. Trial. Iran was creating a kill chain, not for the Laboon specifically, but for the map of American vulnerabilities it was drawing. Back in the Persian Gulf on April 4th, in the hours after the 2 U.S. aircraft were confirmed down, the mood in the E-ring of the Pentagon was a controlled fury that civilian observers rarely get to witness. Secretary of Defense had convened an emergency session. CENTCOM Commander General Eric Kurilla was on secure video from Qatar. The Carl Vincen's admiral was patched in from the Arabian Sea. The question on every screen: what do we do next? Here is where the American response revealed itself, not as a wild escalatory strike, but as a surgical, multi-layer kinetic and electronic counteroffensive that Iran's strategist had catastrophically failed to model. At 13:44 hours, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, which had been operating in the Red Sea and counter Houthi operations, received orders to transit north at flank speed, joining the Carl Vinson in the Gulf of Oman. 2 carrier strike groups converging on the same theater simultaneously. The combined air wing represented over 140 combat aircraft, backed by Ticonderoga-class cruisers and their Aegis combat systems, the most advanced integrated air and missile defense architecture ever deployed at sea. At 14:17 hours, EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft launched from the Carl Vinson and began executing what the Navy calls a full-spectrum denial mission over the Iranian coast. The Growler is not an ordinary aircraft. It is a flying electromagnetic weapon, capable of jamming an entire frequency band simultaneously, blinding the very Tor-M2 radars that had downed the Super Hornet hours earlier. Across the Iranian coast, radar operators watched their screens fill with noise. Their eyes went dark. At the same time, deep beneath the Persian Gulf, 2 Virginia-class attack submarines, USS New Hampshire and USS Minnesota, had been running silent for 9 days, mapping the acoustic signatures of IRGCN fast boats and Iranian Kilo-class submarines. The Kilos, Tehran's black holes of the ocean, had been repositioned in the previous 48 hours, most likely in preparation for a mine-laying operation in the Strait's deep-water channel. The Virginia-class boats tracked them to their new positions, held solution, and waited. They did not fire. But the Iranian captains, when they detected the distinctly American sonar ping of a Virginia-class at dangerously close range, knew exactly what that silence meant. They were marked. What followed at 16:03 hours was the most consequential American strike of the entire conflict's 5th week. B-2. Spirit stealth bombers, operating from Diego Garcia, the Indian Ocean atoll Iran had already targeted with 2 ballistic missiles it subsequently denied launching, released GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, the 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs, against 3 hardened underground missile production and storage facilities in the Zagros Mountains. These were not the sites that had been struck in the opening salvos of the war. These were the facilities Iran believed were invisible, buried under 200 feet of rock, untargetable, their existence a state secret. And the penetrators disagreed. 2 of the 3 facilities were destroyed. The third's structural integrity was compromised to the point of rendering it operationally useless. Iran's missile stockpile, the strategic deterrent that had kept Gulf states in a state of permanent anxiety for years, had just been significantly reduced in a single afternoon. The Iranian response came at 1934 hours, and it was both defiant and revealing in its limitations. A salvo of 8 Shahab-3 ballistic missiles was launched toward Israeli territory from sites near Isfahan. Israel's Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow 3 multi-layered defense architecture engaged all 8. 5 were destroyed in the boost phase by Arrow 3 kinetic interceptors. 2 were engaged by David's Sling. The 8th fragmented prematurely, likely due to the accelerated maintenance cycle Iran had been forced into after previous strikes on its manufacturing infrastructure. 0 reached their intended targets. The barrage that was supposed to demonstrate Iranian resolve instead demonstrated its degradation. At 21:11 hours, as the fires in the Zagros still smoldered and Israeli skies cleared of debris, Iran's foreign ministry issued a statement calling the U.S. strikes an act of terrorism against civilian infrastructure, a claim immediately rebutted by satellite imagery released by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency showing the confirmed military designation of every targeted site. The status of the first downed pilot, the F/A-18 aviator who had gone silent at 6:11, remained officially unknown as midnight passed. Iranian state television broadcast what it claimed was footage of an unidentified American pilot in custody, face obscured, speaking under obvious duress. The Pentagon could neither confirm nor deny. The search and rescue picture was classified, but every American sailor and airman in the theater understood what was at stake in the next 72 hours. Not just a war, but a name. The Houthis, watching from Yemen, recalibrated. Their 2 missile launches against Israel on March 28th had been described as a controlled front. By April 4th's end, Houthi leadership was reportedly in emergency communication with Tehran, debating whether to resume full-scale attacks on Red Sea shipping, the one move that could simultaneously strangle the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Strait of Hormuz, leaving global oil markets with no viable maritime alternative. And the economic consequences of that decision would eclipse the battlefield cost of everything that had happened in the previous 5 weeks. As of 400 hours on April 5th, 2026, the Strait of Hormuz remains open, but barely. 2 U.S. carriers are converging in the Gulf of Oman. 2 U.S. submarines have Iranian kilos under continuous acoustic surveillance. The EA-18G electronic warfare blanket over the Iranian coast has disrupted 3 separate IRGCN radar systems. 1 American pilot is confirmed rescued. 1 remains unaccounted for. And somewhere in the Zagros Mountains, beneath tons of concrete and fractured rock, Iran's missile engineers are staring at the wreckage of what they believed was their most protected secret. Trump's address to the nation on April 1st promised this would be over in 2 to 3 weeks. But the Tor-M2 missiles that brought down an American aircraft on April 4th suggest that Iran's strategists are playing a different clock entirely. They are not trying to win. They are trying to survive long enough for the American political will to fracture, for $4 gasoline and missing pilots, and $1.5 trillion defense budgets to become campaign issues rather than national security imperatives. Here is the question no military analyst in Washington wants to answer publicly. What happens if Iran successfully closes the Strait of Hormuz, not as a threat, but as a fact? What happens to global oil supply, to NATO cohesion that is already visibly fracturing, with Italy publicly breaking from the United States, to a conflict that has now entered its 37th day with no ceasefire framework, no mediator both sides trust, and 1 American airman whose fate remains unknown? The answer to that question will not be written by diplomats. It will be written in the next 72 hours in the skies over the Persian Gulf, in the depths beneath the Strait of Hormuz, and in the encrypted command channels of the most consequential military standoff of the 21st century. The rules of the global order are being rewritten right now, not in meeting rooms, but in missile trails over Gulf state airports, in the sonar pings of Virginia-class submarines, and in the silence of a missing pilot's emergency beacon. Stay sharp, stay informed, and ask yourself one question. If Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz tomorrow, what does America do next? Comment below.